And what are you doing? You're a nursing officer? Okay, where at? Pardon? Kegol. And you came this morning all the way from Kegol? Oh, we have somebody who came from Kandy here. So yeah, we got good participation. Okay, thank you for coming. Thank you for coming. Okay. Now, they have taken my slides from this and put it into this, and I may not be able to work this properly, but let's see, huh? Is that full screen? Okay, there we are. Okay. Our topic of discussion seems to be orientation to aged care. Okay. I'm assuming that all of you folks are less than maybe 35. I'm more than double your age. Okay, so I'm speaking with experience where aged care is concerned. But you folks will come there one day. Okay, so listen carefully. Okay, we are going to talk about the field of gerontology, which is like the expensive name for aged care. Okay, and we're going to talk about ideas related to aging in different cultures and different environments. We're going to talk about the problems that aging has created or caused in terms of the world population. And we're going to look into the causes of aging a little bit. And being that most of you folks are medical people, the terminology that I use may sound too simple, but there are basic theories about how we age. And then we're going to start talking about how we can improve aging in a healthy way. So we can't stop the process of aging, but maybe we can make it a little bit more comfortable and maybe a little bit more productive, and maybe a little bit more psychologically satisfying. Okay, I'm going to be sitting and standing because I don't want to fall asleep while I'm talking too, okay? So I'll be up and down once in a while. Okay, now this doesn't apply to you because you folks are young. But if I'm talking to a group of old people, don't worry about old age. It doesn't last long. And one of the pleasures of old age is that it gets shorter by the day. All right? Applies to all of us. Okay, aged care. There are a lot of different names for this phenomenon. And when you read the literature from different countries, you'll find that they have a vast array, a vast variety of terminology regarding this. Okay. And you have to have all that in your mind somewhere when you're reading, otherwise you may tend to get confused. Okay. Aged care, care of the aged, care of the aging, care of the elderly, elderly care, senior citizen care, institutional care, assisted living, retirement care. Assisted living and retirement care are words that are more commonly used in the United States and North America. Okay. Custodial care, hospice care, terminal care, and of course aged care. Now these words are not exactly the same, but they are used like in a similar context. And if you are not very careful about writing, you might use the words interchangeably and might even change the meaning a little bit. So be aware of what you read and what you write. Now, The expensive word for gerontology or study of, the expensive word for studying the phenomenon of getting old is called gerontology. My accent is somewhat American based because I lived in America for a long time. Okay, so if you think my accent is funny, yeah, it is a little bit off, huh? Okay, it's pronounced as gerontology, and it's from the Greek word for old man, and logos is the study of. Okay, and interestingly, this word was only coined in 1903. It was not very long ago. Okay, and it's the study of old age. Now, there's another branch called geriatrics. Geriatrics is this branch of medicines that studies the diseases of old age, not old age alone, but the diseases of old age. Okay, geriatrics. And some people call it medical gerontology. Now, the word iatros is the Greek word for healer, basically for a doctor kind of thing. And so geriatrics is a combination of the word iatros and geriatrics. The same thing we have for children. Pediatrics, study of children, okay, or diseases of children, illnesses of children, okay. So geriatrics and pediatrics are the two ends of the spectrum, huh? Okay. Now, I don't know whether you fellows are taking notes. You don't have to, because all this is going to be given to you. Okay, it's all available online in our learning system. Okay, so there's no need to write things, but some people are in the habit of taking notes. That's fine with me. All right. Okay. Now, this word gerontology covers a wide area. Okay, it covers the physical, mental, and social changes in people as they age. Now, in a very much broader sense, there is a word called biogerontology, and this is about the aging process, not only in human beings, though, in animals, in plants, and things like that. Why do we get old? Why do everybody, all living matter, why do they get old? Okay. Now, there's another branch called geroscience, okay, investigating the interface of normal aging versus disease-related aging. Okay. Then we have the branch of population aging. What happens if everybody gets old? Now, applying this knowledge to policies and programs, including at the bigger level, the macroscopic level, example for governments when they plan things, or at the smaller level, like if you're running a nursing home or you want to start a business relating to servicing older people, these different branches of gerontology need to be looked into. Okay, now another set of names that you have to learn uh, when you study care of the aged population are the different names given to the institutions, to the service areas, to places that provide the service. Okay? A retirement home, RH. In some literature, they won't write retirement home every time you have to write it. They'll just put RH. Okay? Assisted living facility, ALF. Aged care facility, ACF. GCF, geriatric care facility. SNF, skilled nursing facility. Then you have special skills nursing facility. LTCF, long-term care facility. Activities of daily living, ADL. Bathing, eating, using the bathroom, whether you need help or whether you can do that all by yourself. Then we have personal caregivers, who are basically companions. They provide a big role, psychological, spiritual. Some of the other people, they are more involved with the physical aspects, lifting, moving, eating and things like that. Activities of daily living is now internationally accepted way of describing the levels of dependency, or how dependent you are. There's another one that I should include here. It's called IADL, Instrumental Activities of Daily Living. Remember, activities of daily living are very basic. Bathing, eating, and using the bathroom, basically. Okay, grooming yourself, things like that. Personal hygiene, things like that. Okay, IADL, which is becoming more important, is called instrumental activities of daily living. Instrumental activities of daily living. And the word instrumental, as the word says, it's related to instruments. It's related to instruments. Okay. Now I see the gentleman in front is wearing a wristwatch. I don't have one. Now you have to know how to wind it. You have to know how to read it. You have to know how to change your battery. As you get older, sometimes you can't do that. Not only that, you can't use the telephone. You can't use the microwave. You can't call somebody because you don't know how the system works. Credit cards, various things, bus passes. You can eat and drink and manage activities of daily living, but when you have to make interface with one of our modern systems of communication, suddenly you are incapable. Either we forget, or we get to be slow, or we forget completely. And believe me, it happens to me too. About a week ago, I was punching in numbers on the microwave thinking I was calling somebody on the phone. I had the phone in the other hand, but I was doing this and I said, what am I doing? I mean, for an instant, it happens to all of us at any age, but as you get older, it happens more frequently, and then at some point, you basically can't use this so-called instrument to your advantage. Although these instruments are supposed to be things that help you. Okay? All right. Now, as we get old, we have this thing called dementia. It's very, very slow and stealthy in the way it creeps up on you. You don't realize it yourself. It's people around you who notice it. Now, my wife has told me I'm being demented for the last 10 years. I don't know whether that's true, but nobody likes to be told they're getting demented, but it happens. If you have grandfathers and grandmothers, you will realize they are slow. Their retention power is less. These things seem very obvious, but when you sit down and analyze it, these are things that affect people's lifestyle. Okay? Now, what is dementia? You have to get this very clear in your head. So what is dementia? Okay, serious. That's the degree of how bad it is. Loss of global, serious loss of global cognitive ability. Cognitive means reasoning and understanding. Memory disorders, personality changes, and impaired logic. Everybody has this happen to them at some point or other. Big men, little men, important men, rich men, poor men, religious people, whatever. You all have heard of President Ronald Reagan. He was a very active, very vibrant world leader. But all of a sudden, he suddenly demented. He suddenly kind of lost memory and lost the power to think and say things. And he was yet one of the most powerful men in the world. And also at one point, he had the button for the nuclear bomb, remember? So these things do affect people. His wife wrote a book. I think all of you should read it. He got demented and he kind of wasted away. It took about maybe 15 years. And she called it The Long Goodbye. The Long Goodbye. He didn't even know that she was his wife. So these are the things that happen when you can probably live for a long time, but the meaning of life is totally different. Okay? Now this has led to a thing called memory care. This is like a very fashionable thing in the United States now. People put boards outside, memory care. Will teach you how to kind of retain your memory or improve your memory. It's like, you got a fracture or you got a little pain here, we'll give you this styler and various other things. It's a memory care. It's a very catchy phrase, but maybe it's really not doing what it says. But it's a way of getting older people to get together and kind of making them feel a little bit more important about themselves and kind of trying to spark, little periods of what we call lucidity, where you kind of suddenly remember things very clearly, and then in another 3 or 4 minutes, it's all gone. Memory care is a kind of a business name more than a physiological name. Okay, it's more like a business name. It's very fashionable in the United States now. I'll show you a little documentary about this next time. So when do we become old? Who decides? Is it the individual? Is it the family? Is it the workplace? Is it society as a general, in general, or is it the government? No, who? Okay, or is it a combination? Okay. And on what basis do you decide this, that someone is old? Is it based on age only, counting the numbers? Health, wealth, power, status, working ability, dispensability and disposability, which means like you're useless, so we don't want you anymore. You're discarded. Use and throw. We do that a lot with things like paper plates and plastic spoons and knives and other things like that, disposable. Okay. Then you get to a stage where you are unable to look after yourself financially. So on what basis do we say someone is old? Maybe it's a combination of all of this. And do all of them contribute equally? Probably not. Okay. Unfortunately, now the government has got involved in it, not only in Sri Lanka but all over the world. Okay. So when did the government get involved in this thing? We have to go back a little bit in history. I'm a history buff. It will all happen to you. As you get older, you'll love history. Okay, I'm telling you. All right. Okay. Now, all this started happening after the Industrial Revolution, okay, which started in about the early 1700s. Started mostly in England, but pretty soon Europe also took over, and they used age as a criterion, and that was based on your efficiency in productivity. During the Industrial Revolution, people were like machines. You had to report to work at a certain time, do so many things, get a break for lunch, come back again, work, and la la la. It was a very automated, mechanized kind of system. And basically, the human body was also considered like a machine. Okay, so when the machine got old and no spare parts, lubrication very poor, you can't bend, you can't do this, you're old. Okay. Now, I'm going to give you some figures I'm sure that most of you are going to be surprised about. Okay. At the time that the Industrial Revolution took place in the early 1700s, the life expectancy across the globe. Now, this information is taken from what we would call trusted sources. People have done research and research and research, and they have come up with figures about what happened 100 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. And then somebody can say, oh, how the hell do we know that? It happened 1,000 years ago. But there are people who are studying it. Okay, so we have to assume that what they find and what they report is trustworthy. They may not be very, very accurate, maybe, but it's better than no information. And they keep refining with new technology that we have, with radioactive carbon dating and other similar processes. You can now go back and figure out what the weather was in the world, 10,000 years ago and 100,000 years ago. Now they say that in the early 1700s, the life expectancy of people all over the world was only 31 years. So if we talk about it now in the modern world, they were not old, but they died at age 31. Okay. All right, and in England, the life expectancy was between 25 and 40. Now, life expectancy is a single number. So when you say 25 to 40, it has a very special meaning. And the 25 was the working class. The 40 was the nobility. So even the people who were rich and comfortable were dying at about age 40. And I'll tell you something. About 5 years ago, my brother and I, we visit our mother's grave in Noor Elia. She's buried in the garden in the cemetery of the Holy Trinity Church in Noor Elia. And, about 70 to 80 years ago, the whole town of Noor Elia was basically Little England. It was all the people living there of importance were all British people. The domestic staff and the gardeners and the drivers and all those people were locals, were Sri Lankans. Okay. Now, my brother and I go to Noor Elia very often, and we always go into this church and we walk around the cemetery. It's just like it's like a pastime of ours. Very therapeutic, very therapeutic. We just decided to go around seeing how old these British people were when they died. We were shocked. There was hardly anybody over 40 years of age. I mean, in their mid-30s, mid-20s, all of a sudden dead. It's all recorded there. It's on the gravestone. And we thought, oh my God, they were buried here. They were born in England. They came here to work whatever capacity, but they all died young. Of course, we had malaria and we had hepatitis and we had, poor sanitation. Maybe the water was not good and all of that. Those things are important. And maybe the British people, they also drank heavily. There was no television, there was no internet, There was no bookshop in Noor earlier, I mean, there was very little to do other than just work and come home and drink. That was a style of living, but it ended up killing them. So we'll study about a life expectancy a little bit later. All right. So the first attempt by a government to try and see whether they should do anything for the older people was in 1851, which is not very long ago. Okay, it's about 150 or 175 years ago. And it says non-contributory. You have to know a little bit about economic skills. Non-contributory means that the individual was not paying into any system. So the government was giving them some money, but the individual themselves was not contributing anything to it. In 1856, the French decided that is costing them a little bit too much. So they told some people while they're working, okay, you can put in 10 rupees or 100 rupees every month towards your retirement. So we won't tax you on that. So give it to us. Another way for the government to make money. We will hold it till you retire and then we'll give it back to you. Okay? So it's basically a government trick, but that's what they did. Okay? And the British decided to follow the French pattern, and they started in 1908, okay, 120 years ago. Okay, it's a very recent thing that society began, or governments began to worry about old people. And the USA started in 1875, and they had what is called a private pension plan. So if you're working for a big company kind of thing, the company was allowed to set up a pension plan so that you can put some money in there to use when you're in retirement. Okay. In 1935, the USA began to give money from the government, not privately, but from the government, and this was after what is called the Great Depression. Starting about 1929, America had a very, very rough patch, very, very bad time in terms of economics, and it's called the Great Depression. It went on for about 4 years. There was terrible things happening in the United States, and they recovered, but after that the government decided they will introduce certain government schemes to help the poor and to help the old. And later on, much later on, in 1956, they decided we will do something to help with the medical aspects of old people. That was 1956. Okay, all right. Now they use age 65. Can you see the trick in this? Everybody was dying by age 40, but they said if you go to age 65, we'll give you a pension. It's really very funny. But to somebody who's age 35 or there, it seems like, wow, yeah, you're going to get something. But they had to live till age 65. So the word, the age of 65 has got stuck in our minds as, oh, that's when you begin to get old, kind of thing. This was at a time when the life expectancy was about 31 years. It was less than half of age 65. You see what a big trick it was? But the trick worked. And because of these figures, let's see what has happened to the world today. All right. Now, people who study the aging process look at 4 distinct processes. One is just basically counting the age. It's a number. Then there's biological age, which is probably more related to physiology. Even in families, or even when you compare countries, some people look younger for a longer time, or some people perform better for a longer time, and so you get this biological variation. It's based on physiology, you would think. Okay. Then we have psychological way of looking at how people change as they get older. And then we have the society, the social way of looking at aging. This is where basically governments and NGOs and churches, temples, various religious organizations. In modern English, you refer to these places as faith-based. You don't use the word religion. Okay? Faith-based. Lots of faith-based organizations all over the world, including Sri Lanka. Okay? So people begin to think beyond yourself, beyond the family, beyond the workplace. We look at the social impact of getting old. Chronological age is very easy to understand. And here we come to this thing called lifespan and life expectancy. Does anyone know the difference between lifespan and life expectancy? Sachin, you're standing straight in front of me, so I'm going to ask you first. Anybody want to volunteer? Lifespan would be a range, okay. Yeah, I think that's about partly right, okay. Anybody else wants to try? What do you think life expectancy is? Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Live. Okay. All right. Okay. I think she's getting closer to the definition. When you say life expectancy, you have to specify from when. Now we all expect life expectancy to be calculated from birth. There's nothing wrong with that. That's one starting point. But you can also calculate life expectancy from, let's say, age 50, or life expectancy from retirement, which is like, let's say, age 65. How long do you expect to live after age 65? Not from the time you were born, but from that time. Okay? So lifespan also refers to an individual. Life expectancy refers to populations in general. Okay, in general. Lifespan is an individual thing, and lifespan is related. I'm sorry, life expectancy is related to populations. Okay. Now, biological aging refers to the physical and physiological changes that reduce the working efficiency of organ systems. Okay. Now, let's have a little quiz. The 10 longest living animals. Anybody wants to guess what the longest living animal is? Crocodile, okay. Turtles, okay. Not bad, not bad. We are not hitting the nail on the head, but we're getting close, okay. Crocodile is a reptile, okay. And you said tortoise is also a reptile, okay, all right. Anybody else? We're talking all animals now, okay. We're talking all animals. But ordinarily, when we say all animals, they are things that are visible. We are not looking under the microscope or things like that. Okay. All right. My God, very poor response. Come on. Elephants? Okay, all right. Whales? All right. Okay. Now see, we got a range there. Okay. Number 1. 507 years. The Arctica islandica. It's also called the ocean quahog. Do you know what that is all about? No idea. Okay. And somebody said whales. Okay. Here's a special kind of whale called the bowhead whale because of the shape of the head. Okay. It lives 200 years. But see the difference? There's a 300-year difference between these two guys. Okay. There's the quahog. It's a clam. Bella. Okay. And there it is when it is feeding. It opens its shell kind of thing and grabs something to eat or whatever. And there it is. Okay. 500 years. They are yet harvested in North America and in northern Atlantic area, and it's used for food. Okay. And here's the bowhead whale. All right. Okay, the next is the reptiles we're talking about. This is a reptile endemic to New Zealand. Okay? And it's about 200 years. And eels. We know who eels are, huh? In Sinhalese we say, what? Anda. Okay? They live for 150 years. Now here's this little fellow from New Zealand. Okay? This is supposed to be a very special fellow. And it's like a very close relative of the dinosaurs. Very close relative of the dinosaurs. And of course, we have eels. I'm going to tell you something about eels. I love to eat eel. I don't know about you folks. But I lived in Japan for a very long time. And eel is a very, I don't want to say common, it's kind of a very desired food in Japan. In certain parts of Japan, they harvest eels. They also kind of cultivate them, and they kind of have hatcheries and this and that. And I like the taste of it. Okay. Then we have the tortoise. Someone said tortoise. 190 years. This is the one from the Galapagos Islands. Okay. And there's a kind of shark from Greenland. Okay, that's the tortoise. And they go up to about 4 feet. Huge. See that? Okay. All right. And this is that shark I was telling you about. There's somebody trying to take a picture of it. Okay. And then we have fish, the koi, what we call carp. We see them all over the place. Okay. They live for about 200 years. And then we have the macaws from the Amazon. They live for about 200 years. Someone said elephants. Their maximum is about 85 years. This 86-year-old elephant was in China, gifted to China by, I think, Thailand. So the records are very clear. And it's the oldest recorded elephant. Died recently. Horses about age 25 to 30. And how about the human beings? 85 now. 85. We are. Okay. I looked like that guy when I was little. No one gives a clap or anything like that. Okay, that's what happens when you get demented, you begin to hallucinate. All right? Okay. Now let's look at human beings as a whole. Now these figures are what we should think as trustworthy. Okay? Look at the era, the time periods, in human evolution or civilization. In the early Stone Age, which is about 8,000 to 6,000 before Christ, as it were, the life expectancy was about age 33. Then as we kind of progressed kind of thing, We came to the Iron Age, and it was about age 26. Somewhere in between, it was down to about 20. And then classical Greece and classical Rome, the life expectancy was very poor, age 20 to 30. Then North America, before Columbus got there, was about age 30. Okay, medieval Islamic Caliphate, that's when Turkey, those countries had invaded and gone towards Western Europe. The lifespan was about 35. In Britain, about the year 1000, 2500 was 30. Early modern Britain, somewhere between 25 and 40, depending on your social class. Earlier 20th century, for the whole world, that's early 1900. My father was born in 1900, okay? He lived till age 60, okay? But the average for the world was age 31. Now, the world average now is 67. You see, 31 has now become 67 in 100 years. So we are living longer. So naturally we are going to see more older people. There was nothing called old 1,000 years ago. Everybody died, quote, young. All right. 83.7. Can anyone guess what this figure might mean? Pardon? Now, 2010 world average, okay? In 2010. 83.7. Not really the projection. That's not the world average. It's from Japan. Okay, one country, not the whole world, but just one country. Okay, all right. And what's that? That's the recorded longest living person. Died about 5 years ago, from France. Okay, all right. So that's how the human life span, as it were, or life expectancy has improved or increased. Okay, all right. Now let's look at Sri Lanka, and these Sri Lankan figures are very accurate. Okay, one of the things that the British did, wherever they went in the world, they kept records. Very accurate records. They were trained to do that for whatever reason. Okay? So these figures are partly from the British time and partly now. 1920, our life expectancy was about 32 years. You know, I remember when I was in school, you know, our teachers explaining history and, you know, how proud we need to be of our culture. We had giants and they could squeeze stones and water will come out, and, you know, they lived till 150 years old, and, you know, they could fight like this and that. All nonsense. But that's nice, you know, we have our traditional folklore and stories, which is okay. I got nothing against that. But the reality was very different. Okay? Even the British in Sri Lanka were dying at age 40, from what I have seen in the cemeteries. Okay, so that's how life expectancy was. And today, what's the deal? We have come up to 68 for men and 76 for females. See what has happened to Sri Lanka. We have really increased our life expectancy. Okay, and also at the same time, there's a difference between the men and the women. and the difference is increasing. The difference is increasing. Either the men are dying earlier or the women are living longer. One of the two. Okay, all right. Now these figures are from our Sri Lankan Department of Population Census and Statistics. Okay, so we have to trust them. Okay. So now let's get back to those four things. We talked about chronological age, biological age. Then psychological aging includes changes that occur with sensory, perception, cognition, our ability to adapt, and the total package of personality. Okay. Uh, we have all seen this with our eyes as young people when we look at our own family, our grandparents or whoever they are. We have always noticed how they change, and in a way we accept their changes. A lot of the time we respect their changes, and we have things like and we accept them, we accommodate them, which is very nice, okay, all right. So that's psychological aging. Social aging, now this is the big factor that we are getting into. Okay, we are talking about an individual's role in society and relationships with family. Not only with family, with friends, peers, your little clubs and little groups, okay? And whether you are participating in any way and being like productive. Not productive in an industrial sense, but productive in terms of doing something, seeing the result and being satisfied or happy, that kind of thing. So with time, we notice that these three events, the fourth one is chronologic, that's the arrow, okay? That these three things, they kind of play different amounts of importance as we get older. Those three balls kind of overlap and kind of do things. And as we get older, the social thing becomes very little. You can't see it too much. Okay? You can see the psychological and the physical things a lot because we can see them, measure them, and they're kind of getting overwhelmingly large. Okay. Now, when you're born, the whole world is yours. And when you are a young adult, you are basically healthy because biologically we are all in what is called a growth phase. They are all growing. And today we generally accept people to be full grown by about age 20 or so. Then you enter midlife, and you begin to realize that things are not like what it used to be when you were a teenager. Okay, all right, and then as you get older, you begin to notice that the world gets a little bit smaller, and finally you begin to realize you got limitations in various ways, physically, financially, socially, and you kind of get crowded in or you get boxed in. So that's how our environment becomes smaller and smaller. Now, if you can guess my age, I'll give you a kiss. What do you think my age is? We'll give the girls the first chance. I'm talking because I'm now almost 74, but half my friends are gone. Half my friends are gone. So I'm there, getting close to that point. But my world is really shrinking. Okay? My world is really shrinking. I know a lot more now because of the internet and various other mechanisms which kind of give me all this information. But yet, I'm enjoying it like only by myself. And maybe sometimes with my wife, but not with my brother, not with my sister. That's the way life has evolved. So our environment gets smaller and smaller. And you get funny thoughts. This is not due to dementia, this is due to good reasoning. Now, you won't believe, this week I went for 2 funerals. Okay? And one guy comes to me and says, "Hey, Nihal, we seem to be meeting only at funerals." I said, "Yes, I hope you come for mine." And he says, "Huh, I don't know how many people will be around by the time we go. Nobody will know us." True, that is true. Nobody will know us. I think if you die when you're about age 50 or so, that's about probably the maximum attendance you'll have. After that, it's probably like going down. It's going down. Okay, that's the way life is. Okay, so our environment keeps shrinking as we get old. Now, we talked about getting old as if we are getting old in style, in the sense we are all equipped. But unfortunately, that's not what happens. Okay. Now, this is a British study, 1999% of adults with disabilities. So at some point when you get old, you become disabled. The word disability has a wide range in terms of meaning. But, you slow down, your vision slows down, your hearing gets impaired, your reaction time is slow, you can't walk as fast, you can't climb stairs as fast. Those may not be disabilities, but in a sense they are disabilities because you cannot do it as well as you did it a long time ago. Okay? So, when you look at aging and you look at disabilities, you find that almost half the population are disabled by the time they get to about age 80. Okay, and now with the life expectancy growing and lifespan growing, you're going to have more and more people who are old, not only old, but they're disabled. Okay. Now there's a slight difference between disability and illness. The way we define illness, it's a specific defect or specific problem. But you may be disabled at the same time. Okay, so a combination of both is kind of a double whammy, they call it, huh? All right. So getting old is natural, although we might find it a little bit uncomfortable and also sometimes we say unfair. In ordinary conversation, we use this a lot. Huh? Honey, see what happened to that girl, man? Shh. Unfair, no? It doesn't matter what your religion is, doesn't matter, who you are. You kind of feel that, shouldn't have happened, but it did. Okay, so as we get older, we find that it is not only uncomfortable, but sometimes unfair. Healthy aging is a blessing. Healthy aging is a blessing. Healthy aging is a blessing. In it was 2002, I think it was 2002 or 2003. See, I'm getting old. I can't remember. I was in the United States, and I met a famous Buddhist priest from Sri Lanka. I'm sure you may have heard of his name sometime. Balangoda Ananda Maitri. Anybody heard of his name? I think he died at age 112, if I'm not mistaken. When I met him, I think he was 102. I was with him for about maybe half an hour. I only told him what my name was. He didn't respond. He was like, "Oh, so you're so and so, very nice. That kind of thing you could see from his face. He could talk. He was, activities of daily living. He could, all do it. I was taken to him by a friend of mine who had known him personally for about 30 or 40 years. But what I was impressed with was that, you know, for him it was just another day. It didn't matter whom he met or why they met or whatever. He was living in this little world of his own, totally happy. And he, according to my friend, he didn't have any kind of, quote, illnesses that he was being treated for. He was just old. So he was aging in a healthy way. I also know at the same time, in that very temple that he was a guest of, was another Buddhist priest. I don't want to mention names because he is yet alive. And he got to know me by accident. And I don't think his age is more than maybe 55 or 60 at the moment. To me, he was a little bit like too heavy. And my image of a Buddhist priest is that they are kind of on the skinny side, at least that's what it was when I was a child. Now you can see them getting to be sizable, they're supposed to have only 2 meals, but it seems as if they are eating a lot or whatever. And somebody introduced me to him and said, "Me Mahatya, Hari Prasiddha Dostarek and this and that." And after he told me, "Avavada den puluwan." I said, "Oh." So he took me up to his room in this temple in California. Okay? And he started telling me all the illnesses he has. He's got all the illnesses in the book. And so I asked him, I said, "You must be having a personal physician. You must be taking some medicines for it." The funny thing is that he had about 20 personal physicians. And everybody was giving him medicines, and it's all there like a pharmacy. So I said, "Why do you want why do you want advice from me?" He says, "You got it all there." And I said, "These are all your diacares, these are the doctors, so why are you calling me?" He says, "Doctor, මේක නම මට ආවාද දෙනවනේ. ඉතින් බෑ කියන්නත් බෑනේ. ඇයිලා මට බෙහෙත් දෙනවනේ." ඉතින් කොහොමද වගන්නේ? "අනේ මන් දන්නේ මං ඉඳලා ඉන්න එකක් ගන්නවා ඒක කරනවා ඉස්සරහට." එතකොට මොකටද ගන්නේ? නෑ නැත්තම් ඒගොල්ලෝ හිත අමනාප වෙනවා. So what can I do? I can't help him. Okay, he's only about age 60, I would think. But he's got high blood pressure, he's got diabetes, he's got arthritis, he's got poor vision, he's got some kind of a heart arrhythmia. And I don't know whether that's true, but that's what he tells me. He has been told. So he's aging with a lot of disabilities. Okay, and that seems to be very unfair. Okay. So if you have an illness on top of that, it's like an added burden. And if you have an illness with a disability, it's really an added burden, not only to self, okay, to family, and to society. Okay. That's why in today's world, getting old is not an individual's affair or problem. It usually begins to affect somebody. Okay. So, while the number of aged humans and the maximum lifespan tended to increase in every century since the 14th century, traditionally, the family is the one who took care of the elderly. Okay? And the family was something that lived together. Today, it is not necessarily so. So the family structure has changed. I don't want to use the word destroyed, but it has changed to the point that being old becomes a burden to somebody. Whereas in the past, traditionally, we used to accommodate it. We didn't really discuss it as a burden. But nowadays, we are beginning to discuss it as a burden. Okay. which is in a way sad, but it is reality. It is reality. Okay. The family being together is called a nuclear family. It was only with the Industrial Revolution that idea shifted in favor of a convenience and population-based system because of rapid increase in the population, urbanization, and breakdown of the family. Okay. So care homes for the aged emerged in the 19th century, okay, starting about the 1800s. And as a specialty, as a study subject, in 1937, the United Kingdom looked into this business of getting old. Okay. The Gerontology Society of America was formed in 1945. Formal studies and university courses started in 1950. Okay. And in Sri Lanka, the Secretariat for Elders was established in 2000 by a parliamentary act under the Protection of Elders Rights Act 9 of 2000. So you can see that the focus on studying aging and providing some kind of support systems, that history is not very old. It's probably 100 years old. Yet human beings have started counting time at least from 3000, 4000 years BC. But as a social unit, we have not given it adequate importance till only about 100 years ago. Of the roughly 150,000 people who die each day across the globe, about 2/3, they die of age-related causes, not necessarily disease. Now, these age-related causes are things like accidents, falls, things that happen because of old age, not necessarily because you're sick. Okay? And in industrialized nations, the proportion is much higher. They say close to 90%. Okay? So just being old is dangerous if you don't care for yourself. Talking about that, I'll tell you what happened at my home yesterday. I wanted to surprise my wife. She went out saying she goes shopping. I'll be back in an hour. So usually that means about 3 hours. So I got the maintenance people to come up and I fixed grasping bars in the bathroom around the shower. But she herself fell in the bathroom about 2 years ago. Luckily, the walls and the ceilings didn't crack, so it was all right. Her head, I think her head had a little scrape or whatever. She made a big fuss. Anyway, so she came back and she said, "Who did this?" I said, "Did what?" "These grasping bars." And I said, "I'm getting old." I said, I think I need to put them in. "Ah, so you thought of it, huh? I told you to do this about 2 years ago when I fell." I said, "But you were too young at that time, so I didn't do it." So I said, "Now I decided I'll put it because I'm getting old." So it was a simple thing that I did. But it can happen. You can slip in the bathroom and fall just because you're old. There's nothing wrong with the bathroom. There's nothing wrong with the soap. There's nothing wrong with the water. It's just that you're old. So accidents cause a lot of problems, more than what we think. Simple things like rugs on the floor. You trip on them. In America, very common. You trip over your cat or you trip over your dog. You bust your femur or your hip, or you get a concussion or whatever. So you die from something like that. So you have to be careful and make sure you. So old age is not a disease. In fact, older people are an asset to the community. Okay, And we must always try and make life easy for them. Okay. So is this a personal, families, social, community, state, or government responsibility trying to make things better? Whose responsibility is it? And if it is shared, in what proportion should they be shared? And to help answer this question, in 2013, that was only 4 years ago, okay, an organization called HelpAge International came up with a measure called the Global Age Watch Index. This had never been done in the world before. They looked at a lot of practical things that are encountered by older people, and they came up with an index. They came up with a measure. Okay? The index is the first ever measure of quality of life and well-being of older people around the world. Okay? The index is based on 4 areas: income security, health status, employment and education, and enabling environment. This enabling environment is a very big thing. See, if you have an old grandmother or grandfather at home, and you have a big enough house kind of thing, you can give them a room and keep them there, and that's life. An enabling environment may be, you provide some kind of activity, entertainment, involvement. So the person is not just like a prisoner in solitary confinement. They become engaged. It takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of effort to do that. Okay, so an environment, enabling environment is something that really brings pleasure and satisfaction as you get older. They use 13 indicators, okay, to get this measure. Okay? And they looked at the needs, the problems, and the rights of old people that need to be considered to make life comfortable. Now, they covered 91 countries, and the 91 countries had about 90% of the world's population. Anybody knows how many countries we have in the world today? Very good. Yeah, 193. Okay, so didn't cover even half of that. But obviously they looked at the countries which have bigger populations. That's why they got 90% of the population. Okay, there are 193 countries in the UN today. Okay. Now I'm just going to throw a few things here before we go any further. Pakistan was almost at the end, 89th. Okay. Sri Lanka was number 36. India was 73. And Nepal was 77. So Sri Lanka is doing, in a way, pretty good. Now, remember, this has got nothing to do with trying to find out where the money is coming from or who's helping whom. It's not a measure of trying to assign responsibility or assign some kind of thanks to. This is just a measure of how the individual in these countries live. Okay. So this shows in Pakistan at least, okay, they had very little income, very little what they call pension coverage or source of money. They had inadequate health, inadequate education, and inadequate employment opportunities for older men and women in Pakistan. Now, just in the case of Pakistan and some other countries, there is a lot of child labor. Maybe in Sri Lanka also there is a lot of child labor. So the older people, in a way, don't have an opportunity to do something because the children are put in place. The children are put in place of the older people. So the older people kind of waste away. Whereas they probably have good skills, they have good experience, maybe they are slow, but they have better imagination. Maybe they can improve a product or whatever. Mhm. But this is how society works. So, what is the time now? 10:20, huh? Okay. Uh, okay, we'll go till about 11 and then we'll take a break. Okay. All right. Now let's look at the issue of population alone. Okay. Uh, I told you about hidden information in a graph or in a graphic presentation. Okay. Here we have three time periods: 1950, 2000, and 2050, and we have the age groups of in blue, green, and in gold or yellow or whatever. You can see that the age 65 group in the year 2050 is this big, whereas in 1950 it was that big. You all know what pie charts are. Okay, you can see that the pie, the piece of pie in 2050 is much bigger. And you can see that it has also changed from 1950 to 2000. And you can see that the green part, 20 to 64, which in a way you can call the productive period in life, in the sense you're young, you're basically in good health, and you can do something and produce wealth or something. That part has gone from 51% to 57%. Okay, so that's an improvement. Not a lot, but that's an improvement. However, you see these two sectors. My point is working very good. Okay, these two sectors are basically supported by this sector. So when it comes to economics, these fractions are very important because it shows the dependencies. So the 0 to 19% has gotten smaller by 2050, but the older people have gotten bigger. So this part of the pie is supported by this part of the pie. This is the basics of economics and pension plans. How many people are there to work to support the others? How many people are there to support the dependent people? This is the biggest issue in economics. Okay, now this is a slightly different thing, but this is talking about health care expenditure. Not numbers of people, but healthcare expenditure. Okay, this is from New Zealand. Okay, 1951, 2002, and 2051. If you look at the expenses for people who are 65 plus, in 1951, 28%, 2002, 40%, 2051, 62%. So a larger portion of healthcare expenses are going towards looking after the older people. Okay. Now, these countries like New Zealand, Australia, and all of that, their record keeping is very good. So you have to trust these figures to be accurate. Okay. And obviously somebody is studying the subject. That's why we get these bits of information. Now, we're talking about the different age groups. This is how the age groups are distributed around the world. If you take a look at Africa, you can see majority of the countries, people are very young, very young. very young. Okay. Obviously, there aren't a lot of old people because they're dying young. Okay. Now, the red countries are countries we can identify very easily. Okay. Their median age is about 30 to 40. And in some countries, the median age is 40 to 50. Canada is one of them. And some European countries. Okay. This distribution pattern is one of the reasons why we are having mass migration these days. Some of these countries which don't have enough people to work and look after the older people, you have people being imported to supply the labor. Okay. So Sri Lanka also is part of that labor force. Now we are going to get into a little bit of academic stuff here. Huh? You all know what this is about, huh? What is this called? Anybody? This part here? It's called a traditional population pyramid. Population pyramid. Okay. Uh, let me see whether there's a better picture of this. Okay. Okay. You can see that the shape is more or less a pyramid, although it's curved a little bit here and curved a little bit here. And these lines here are basically age. Okay, so you can have many lines here and have 15 to 20, 20 to 25. You can, stratify. You can make layers. Okay, and this is the figure that most countries had for the longest time. Okay, now the shapes have begun to change because people are living longer, people are reproducing less, and therefore this area here is getting to be blunted. Okay, so this particular shape is called the expanding population pyramid. This shape, pyramid with a little bit of a tail here and a little bit of a tail here. Okay, this one goes straight down. Okay, it's also expanding, but you can see that the slight difference. Okay, there are more younger people here than here. Now this is when the pyramid begins to change to a slightly different shape, and they call it a kite. Sometimes it's not really a kite as yet, but it's like a kite. See, stationary, it means that there are very few, well, I don't want to say very few, there are equal number of people in all the layers till you get to the very end. Okay, and here you get what is called a contracting population, where you see that this lower area here is basically like this. It's not like this. Okay, if you take a look at this here and this here, you can see here the lines are tapering to a tail. Over here they're coming this way. Okay, so if you look at the world, this was what it was in about 1950. This is about what it is about now. Okay, this was somewhere in between. Okay, this is a range from 1950 to 2050. This is 2050, and this is about now. Here's a slightly like exaggerated, I should say, more explanation. Okay, they have looked at males and females. I forgot to tell you that earlier. Okay, the pyramid is divided into two, cut in the middle, one side for males, one side for females. And here they are looking at Afghanistan in 2010. You can see there are very few older people, but there's a lot of young people here. Okay. Then they are looking at Tunisia, and they call it intermediate. You can see that the number of young people are kind of, or very young people are very, very little here. There's a bulge here, and then it becomes a bit of a pyramid. The United States in 2010, they called it a mature population pyramid. You can see it's like going straight up here, and then it becomes a pyramid here at the top. Okay, so the USA is the country to which people migrate a lot. So their demographics is not due to natural expansion or natural death. It's because people are coming in all the time. Okay, that's just the nature of it. Now this is Germany in another 8 or 9 years. You can see this is very top heavy. It's very top heavy. If something is top heavy, it can topple easily. So this is the message. Okay, so these are the 4 different types of population pyramids, as it were, although traditionally the pyramid shape is now disappearing. Okay, this is Japan, 1950. This is 2055, and this is 2005. We can see how the shape is changing. This is more like a kite. This is more like a pyramid. Okay. This is also the same thing, but now they are using figures to say 59.6, 63, 51. This is about the middle age, that age 20 to 64 kind of thing. They're considering it 15 to 64, the productive time, and these are over 65. You can see how the over 65s are building up, and this part is getting less, the bottom, the young generation. Okay, now let's take a look at Mother Lanka. Sex structure. Oh, did I put sex structure? Oh, it should be structure. Okay, we'll forget about the word sex here. Structure of the population, 2001. This is in the year 2001. That's 15 years ago. Okay, that's how it is. It looks more or less, in a way, like a pyramid, you know, but the curve, it's a little curvy. It's 2001. 2026, which is in about another 10 years. 2051, and in 2100. This is how Sri Lanka's structure is going to change. Okay. This is from a Sri Lankan publication. Okay, by the. So the life expectancy at birth in Sri Lanka in 1920 to 22, and what it is today. I think we saw this before. Huh? All right, this causes another problem. When the men die early and the women die late, and there's a difference, there is a reflection of that even earlier in life. Okay? And what happens is that there are more women than men, and that is called the sex ratio. And therefore, there's competition to get married or to pair up or whatever, because it's not one-to-one. So that ratio changes quite a bit. Now this ratio also can change due to migration patterns, you know, people going out to a foreign country to work for 3 or 4 years or whatever, and the family gets broken up and various other things like that. But usually, if the ratio gets to be too big, it's a bad sign. Okay. See, if you look at Sri Lanka in 2001, it was 97.9. That means for every 100 men there were 97 women. Now we have only 93. Now we have only 93. At one point it came down to 92, in fact. In fact, what's it now? 2016. It's 95 now. It's going to go down much more. All right, now this is the rate of getting old. Rate. You can see Japan is number 1 in the world. They have beaten all the other countries, but you can see that these countries are all the so-called rich countries, okay? The so-called rich countries to which people want to migrate. Okay? See, very few people want to migrate to Nepal or to Bhutan or to in fact to Sri Lanka. Okay? Everybody wants to go somewhere else. Okay, that's where the money is. That's where the work is. That's where the income is. Okay, so in these countries, this is the rate at which they are getting old. Okay, Canada, large country but very little people. Okay, see what has happened between 1900 and 2030. Okay, portion of Canadian population age 65 and over, 5%, 8%, 12%, 20% in 2030. Okay, so the older population is increasing. Okay, let's see. Okay, this is a bit of a difficult slide, but I'll try to explain it. Okay, um, the speed of population aging, the values represent the number of years required or expected for percent of population age 65 and over to go from 7% to 14%. Basically 7 to 14 means it's a double. Okay, how long does it take for people over the age of 65 in a country to double? Okay, Sri Lanka takes 27 years. Okay. Take France, 115 years. So the smaller the figure, the faster, as it were. Okay, it's a little difficult to understand it unless you study it very clearly. Okay? Japan is 26. It will take 26 years for its population, the older population, to double. Okay, US, Japan, Europe, and China. Europe is all put together. Okay, 1957, 1950, 27, and 2020, which is like about now you can see. Percentage of the population over 65. See, Japan, it's going up to 30%. Over the age of 65, do you know what Sri Lanka's population percentage is at the moment? Over the age of 65? Anybody has any idea? It's running about 14% at the moment. About 14. Okay. And if you look at the developing countries and the developed countries, the maroon color is the developed countries. You can see that bar doesn't change very much. But the developing countries, people over the age of 65 is increasing quite a lot. Quite a lot. Okay. This is the same thing but with different countries. Okay, developing countries and developed countries are here one over the other. Okay, pardon?
So why that in European countries are pretty increasing?
Pardon?
In European countries, age group is rapidly increasing.
Because we are reproducing, we are, how shall I explain it? The developing countries have a faster, has a higher fertility rate. They produce more children. Okay, and presently, the number of people who are old, if they don't die quickly, they will become older. In the developed countries, the number of people who are old are already not very high. So they don't increase in numbers. So that your question is very good. Your question is very good. This is the problem that we have now in Southeast Asia and in most of the Asian countries. Okay, in most of the Asian countries, this is the pattern in which the number of old people are increasing. They are increasing very fast. Okay. In the developed countries, it's not increasing. It's like more or less stable. You can see the heights are increasing only very little.
So is that due to that developing countries are now engaging with the developed medical systems and they are expanding, but the developed countries they are doing this from the long time.
Now, the developed countries, one of the
Yeah.
problems is that their population is not increasing. Their population is not increasing. Okay. In some countries, in fact, the population is going backwards. France, Japan, the population is going backwards. They're not going forwards. So the number of old people don't increase, okay, as a total. Now, they may have a large number of old people as a percentage within the country, but when you compare countries, they're not supplying any more old people to the world, whereas the developing countries are promoting or producing a lot of people because they are living longer and they're getting up there. Okay. This is the same thing. The color shades are different to show what it is like in different areas. 1950, 1990, and in 2030. This is how the distribution will be in the developed versus the undeveloped countries. See, the developed countries, you will notice, is more like a triangle, but in the undeveloped developing countries, the base is changing quite a bit compared to this, and this is a smaller number of people. It's not increasing, whereas this part is increasing. Southeast, mostly in the Asian countries. Well, let's not. This is California where I lived. Okay, all right. All right. Within only 10 years, there will be 1 billion older people. That means over the age of 65 in the world. The present world population is about 7.5 billion. So what they're saying is that about 1 billion of the 7.5 billion will be older people, and that's about 1/7. 1/7 is about 15%. So I'm talking about all over the world. Okay, and they are using the word older here. The definition of older here, I think in some countries they use 60, in some countries they use 65. So depending on how it is, the figures may look kind of different. Okay, so getting back to what happened before, we are talking about the older population now having to be supported by the younger population. The older population, they are dying. They are not reproducing anymore. The younger people, they are also not producing as much. So the people in the middle are the ones who are caught, having to provide for the smaller people and for the older people. Okay? So this is figures from, I think this is from the United States. Okay, you see, in 1990 and in 2000 and 2025, to support one old person, we had about 6 people. That means 6 people were working. Okay, then it became 4. Now it become 2. So fewer people are working. So they have to probably work harder. That means they have to make more money, as it were, or whatever they get is taken away to support these people. So the leftover money, their disposable income, is much less. So this is what's happening in China right now. The very young have to support their parents, and they have to support 2 sets of grandparents, and you can see they're using canes and wheelchairs. One of the questions you may have is to write an essay on this particular cartoon. I think this is a very clever cartoon. The old people are sitting on the globe. The old people are sitting on the globe. Now, to do all this, you have to figure out what the population of the world is and all of that. This line just shows, this graph just shows that different organizations that try to estimate, they basically all come to the same conclusion. So which means that the figures are trustworthy. Okay? All these different colors here are, they belong to these different organizations that have looked into the matter, and this is their final product. We find that the lines are more or less parallel. That means that the research methodology has produced the same result, which means that we can trust them. So population projections, there are 3 or 4 projections depending on what happens. Right now we are in about 2015. You can have a growth scenario which is high, a growth scenario which is medium, or growth scenario which is low. And from country to country, that curve will be different. All right. Okay, let's take a break for 15 minutes. Okay, let's take a break for 15 minutes, and we'll get on to aging and healthy aging.